Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Breeze Time with Kathy. I'm so glad to be with you here. One of the things I love about Northern Virginia, I guess I moved here about in 2009, so what does that make it now? About 12 years ago? Is the diversity. I tell people that all the time. I grew up in a small town just outside of New Orleans, and there wasn't a whole lot of diversity there, but here, there's people from all around the world. When I was working in the emergency room, the most common second languages we had was, of course, Spanish. But after that, Arabic and Amharic were the next two. Amharic is an Ethiopian language. They were the next two most commonly spoken foreign languages. So it was quite an experience. And as a matter of fact, I'm kind of proud of myself. I learned to be polite in Arabic. I don't know any Amharic. Of course, I got a little closer to Arabic because I would travel in the Holy Land. And of course, they speak English, Arabic, and Hebrew there. And so I knew some Arabic. And it helped me too with my work. Now, Spanish, I got to be proficient as a nurse. In Spanish, I can ask people, I can tell them I'm a nurse. Me llamo Kathy, yo soy una de las enfermeras. Hablo poquito español. My name is Kathy. I'm one of the nurses. I speak a little Spanish. And then I would ask them what's wrong with them. And I could get through a basic triage, we called it, getting information from them. And I got to be pretty good at that. I had memorized the phrases. The problem was I was good with the phrases I'd memorized. But aside from that, I couldn't speak very much Spanish at all. Now that I have retired from nursing, I have to admit I don't use it, other than to say, buenos dias, buenas tardes. That's about it. Adios, ciao. Of course, ciao is Italian, but the Spanish use it too. My uncle, he spends half the year in Italy, and I visited him several times, so I learned to say a few polite things in Italian. The world is filled with just diverse and wonderful people. And I've always said God must love diversity because, look, no two things are the same. And all these different languages, well, there's a whole lot to be said about the language we learn. Now, an interesting story happened to me as a nurse about language was that a woman came in, and her mother was 80-something, and she said, I think my mother has a urinary tract infection. Well, older women are prone to get urinary tract infections. And then I said, well, what kind of symptoms is she having? And I expected to hear the normal things you hear about a urinary tract infection. Burning, going to the bathroom a lot, painful urination, these things, nursing stuff. But no, what she told me was, she's forgotten her English. And I said, what? Well, she's forgotten her English. It seems that her mother was born in Ireland, and she was a Gaelic speaker. She grew up speaking Gaelic, and English was a second language. So when she got confused, she had a urinary tract infection, can cause confusion and can sort of give you symptoms similar to dementia, except a lot of times they clear up when you treat the infection. So it's always one of the things we look for when somebody tells us that the person seems more confused or has an altered mental status. Besides ruling out strokes, we also check to see if the symptoms are sort of vague, if maybe they have a urinary tract infection. So sure enough, we checked her, I talked to her, and her mother's speaking Gaelic. And I said, well, do you speak Gaelic? She said, well, my mother never taught me Gaelic. She said, I didn't need to learn to use it. But I know she's trying to tell me things, and I'm so sorry I never learned Gaelic. Well, we went ahead and tested, and yes, indeed, she had a urinary tract infection. and I gave her some IV antibiotics to get her started and some extra fluids to help flush the infection out of her system. And you know what? Before I went home that night, there was a little delay in getting her a room upstairs. She was speaking English again. It was really amazing. I had never run into that particular symptom. But you know, our language, I have run into people who forget the second languages they've learned as they have problems with memory. Recent memory fades away, but the earliest memories stay the longest. And so oftentimes the language that you spoke in childhood is the language you keep the longest. It's pretty interesting, really. And I have seen it in the healthcare center, a few residents. One woman, I remember a few years back, she only spoke Portuguese. And I've had people who speak only French. But for the most part, it's an interesting thing. You know, Americans, shame on us, most people like me, typical white Americans, I know you don't use those kind of words, but traditionally, your typical American hasn't been interested in learning other languages. And that's a shame, because Europeans and people elsewhere in the world, they speak multiple languages. It's very common. And I think it's kind of sad that, at least when I was growing up, that wasn't an emphasis at all. You learned a second language just because you needed it in college, but not because you ever really expected to use it. It was sort of part of a well-rounded education. That's the only thing it was. But moving right along, I remember, I told you I lived in a kind of small little world in my used to be a rural town, a little rural community outside of New Orleans, but it had become a suburb. It was in the process of becoming one of those bedroom suburbs of New Orleans during my lifetime there in Belle Chase, the time that I lived there. But I remember I was like 18 years old, I think, which is was the legal age for drinking in Louisiana at the time. And I was at a wedding. My neighbor, who was who I grew up with, Cheryl, was 3 or 4 years older than I was. And I was good friends with her and her younger sister, who was my age growing up. And Cheryl was getting married. And I remember I had champagne for the first time. Well, I had had 2 glasses of champagne, and I was beginning to feel the buzz. And I remember I was mingling around, and I walked up to him, and there was Cheryl's new husband talking to the people who I knew were his parents. And I'm standing there, and I'm smiling, and I'm realizing I don't understand a word they say. Am I drunk? And I was afraid, because I didn't have any experience with drinking, that I was so drunk I couldn't understand English anymore. But then I realized I realized that after a few minutes I remembered he's from Chicago, and his parents are Polish, and they spoke Polish. And I never heard Polish in my life, and there they were speaking Polish. And I just thought I was so naive. I thought I was too drunk. Just 2 glasses of champagne had buzzed me so much I couldn't understand English anymore. Yeah. But probably one of the most touching experiences I've had with foreign language was a young woman named Michelle. She was French Canadian. She wanted to go to college in New Orleans, and she had come down to New Orleans, and on a great adventure. She and her father had ridden their bicycles all the way from Quebec down to New Orleans, and she had applied to go to University of New Orleans and had gotten accepted. However, she'd gotten there early, and it was probably about 3 or 4 weeks before she could move into the dorm, and they didn't have a lot of money, and so they were temporarily homeless. And I met her, and we got to talking, and she came. She had, on her way down, she'd been raised in Quebec. She'd been raised really without religion. Nominally, most French-speaking Canadians consider themselves Catholic, but she'd never really been to church. She said her parents had brought her there when she was baptized, but they never went to church after that. So, she really didn't know much about God or have any kind of religion. But on her way down, they had spent some time with some people who were very nice, and they were Methodists like us, and like my church that I was in at the time. And they, and she'd studied about Christianity a little bit more, and she'd felt like she was born again. She had one of those experiences where she felt a connection to God. She saw Christ as her Savior, and she just felt that experience of that connection with God, with a living connection with God and a vital part of her life, which was something she never had felt before. Now, they continued. I think that had happened somewhere, as they came through St. Louis, I believe, or I don't know where they came through the middle of the country, maybe Virginia or something, on their bicycles. They took about 6 months to make the trip. And as they came down, and she said they had given her a Bible, which she tried to read. And so when she came to New Orleans, it just so happened that she was staying near our church, and we helped her find some temporary housing, she and her father, and she would come to church. And at the time, I was the Sunday school teacher. I was in seminary, but I hadn't graduated yet. I was still working as a nurse, and I was the Sunday school teacher. So she would come to the Sunday school class, and she really enjoyed the classes, and she talked and she participated. She was a new Christian with lots of enthusiasm and lots of ideas and lots of questions, but with a good heart. And I thought that was wonderful. And then one day she says to me, she says, I read the Bible, but I'm having trouble because the Bible I have is in English. And you see, God talks to my heart, and in my heart, I speak French. Wow. When she said that, God talks to my heart, and in my heart, I speak French, I was so touched. So what did I do? I went out and I found her a French Bible, for which she thanked me profusely. We all have a language of our hearts. It's interesting. I don't know if we think about it. But when we really connect with God, that's where we'll find Him, in our hearts, speaking to us in whatever language He needs to. Speaking to our hearts, making that connection. I hope and pray you have that connection. If there's anything I can do to help, I'll be more than happy. But language, as I said, is an interesting thing. May God bless you and keep you, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Take care.